Today's guest is one of the most influential thinkers in the world of branding, marketing, and leadership storytelling. David Aaker is Vice Chairman of Profit, a global brand and marketing consultancy, and Professor Emeritus at the Haas School of Business at the University of California, Berkeley. Widely regarded as the father of modern branding, David has shaped how organizations understand, build, and communicate the power of brand for decades. He's the author of more than 100 articles and 17 books, including Building Strong Brands, Brand Leadership, and Creating Signature Stories, as well as the new one he was just telling me about, Aaker on Branding, right?
Yep, the second edition.
Second edition. All right. So in Creating Signature Stories, David explores how leaders and organizations can use authentic, emotionally resonant narratives to connect with employees, customers, and communities, not through slogans or data, but through stories that actually stick. His work has guided countless companies from global giants to emerging innovators in discovering and sharing the stories that define who they are and what they stand for. David, it's an honor to have you on the show today. Thank you so much for the conversation.
Yeah, thanks for having me, Clint.
It's quite prolific. I've written 2, you've written 17 and counting, or maybe 18. I don't know, you've written a lot. So I don't have your stamina for that. But I like to think of all the people who come on the show as superheroes, and every superhero has an origin story. So I'm just curious, what is your backstory?
Well, I graduated from MIT at the Sloan School, and then I had a very unproductive short career at Texas Instruments in Houston, and then I got a PhD at Stanford, and where I became kind of a statistician. And so my early work was quantitative modeling. I did a stochastic model of consumer behavior, which was well published, but nobody read, and nobody should have read. And my daughter calls it the most boring thesis ever. And then I did a lot of econometric work to sort out what works. And then I got into advertising. I wrote a book on advertising. I got into market research and wrote a book on that. I got into strategy and wrote a book on that. And so I was kind of all over the map. And then in the 80s, a couple of things happened. One was the BCG growth share matrix was such a dominant strategic idea. And the idea that you want to hit home runs, and you do that by finding growth contests, growth markets, and being the large market share in those growth markets. So the key was to build market share. And it didn't matter how you did that. And at the same time, we had our first glance at big data. In the mid 80s, late 80s, half the stores had scanner data. So you could tell what you had an instantaneous gratification. And the result of the pressure to build share and the scanner data got people to destroy brands by having price out promotions and doing anything they could to increase short-term sales. And at the end of the 80s, people basically stopped back and said, this isn't working. We are not only destroying our profits, we are growing. And so the time was right for brand equity. So when brand equity appeared, executives all over the place said, this makes sense. We're going to build assets that will fuel profits in the short run and fuel growth in the long run. And so they were receptive to the idea of brand equity. But nobody had defined brand equity. So I wrote this first book, Defining Brand Equity. And what the main contribution I made was that I said it's more than awareness and an image that you can delegate to an agency. It also includes brand loyalty. That's part of the equity of the brand. And so that really, not just my book, but that idea really changed everything. It changed what marketing did, what branding was. It changed how it's measured. It changed who did it. I mean, marketing in the 80s was led by middle managers who delegated a lot to an agency. And it wasn't it was just tactical. It wasn't seen as something that the top executives got much involved in it. And so after in the 90s, we started to see CMOs and VPs of marketing become part of the C-suite, and they started engaged in strategy, because when you stop and think about it, when you have brand loyalty, everything is involved. It's product development. It's the culture of the company. It's the relationship with consumers and the customer path and everything. And so, and you're looking forward. You have things like segmentation becomes more important, and consumer insight becomes more important. And so, so that really changed a lot of marketing, and that's kind of how I got started. And then I wrote a second book on how you manage a brand. How do you build and manage it and leverage it? And as I was telling you just offline before, that a lot of people think that's the only two books I wrote. But then I started elaborating with some other books and applying the ideas to other areas.
Well, let's pivot to the creating signature stories. What was the inspiration behind that one?
Well, my daughter Jennifer is a professor at Stanford, and at the time was teaching a course in storytelling. And she did that for several years. And I got intrigued with storytelling because it struck me that had a lot to do with building brands. And so we spent literally a year and a half trying to address the question, what is not a story? Because if you ask them, what's the story of your brand? They'll give you 5 bullet points, the things they think that is important about the brand. Never mind, the audience couldn't care less, but that's what they think. That's their story. So everything is a story. And so if everything is a story is not a very good construct. So so finally, we decided that facts are not stories, and descriptions are not stories, and you need to have a narrative of some kind. You describe an event or a person or something, and then I said, well, what can how can I describe that? And I said, I'll invent a new term, signature stories. So never mind that stories can be anything. Signature stories, I can say what they are and what they aren't. And so that's how we started signature stories. And incidentally, I wanted my daughter to write the book, but she didn't want to write another book, and so I wrote the book.
So what is a signature story, and how does it differ from just like a marketing anecdote?
Well, a signature story is one that it first of all has a strategy message of some kind, but it's a narrative. So it describes an event or an incident or a person or a program or something. It's just not a set of facts or descriptions. And it has to stand out. It has to have some kind of a wow effect. It has to say, hey, that's interesting. I need to share this. Or this is informative. I really need to share this. It's really special. Or this is knockdown humorous. I got to share this. So it's got to have some kind of a pop.
Now, you say there are 4 crucial criteria when doing signature stories. There's intriguing, authentic, involving, and delivering a strategic message, like you just said. So you talked about strategic message. Well, what does intriguing, authentic, and involving involve?
Well, intriguing means that there's something that makes it interesting, something that makes it shareable, and it might be humor, it might be emotion. But it's got to be something that you think it's worth. It's got to perk your interest in something. It's got to catch your interest and keep your interest.
Okay. And how about authentic?
Well, authentic, it has to, it can't allow you to say, that's fake, that's phony, they're just trying to sell me something. It just can't precipitate those negative things. If they don't do that, then it's authentic. It doesn't have to be true. I mean, you can have a friend of mine in advertising once told me, you can have cows flying through the air, and say, well, if a cow could fly, that's kind of how they'd look. I mean, you just accept it in the context as is okay. I mean, you accept in the context in the sense you do not. Like, it doesn't come to your mind to say cows can't fly. That's phony. So the word phony just doesn't come into your mind. If it doesn't come into your mind, it's authentic. It can add what we call verisimilitude. That means it's the appearance of true. It's if cows would fly, that's how they would look, and that's part of the story. And I'm not going to worry about it being phony.
And how about involving? What does that
But
mean?
involving is a story has to draw you in. It has to involve you. And, all great writers have had the ability to do that. You just get drawn in. You get to know the characters of the story, and you get to have empathy for them, and you understand them, and they're sort of part of your life in some sense. And you care. You care about the characters. You care about the information. You care about you're drawn in.
So why do you think stories are so powerful when it comes to branding and leadership?
Well, I don't think I know. I mean, there's enormous research on stories in psychology and in English and so on. And it turns out that if you can formulate a fact in a story and compare it with just telling that facts, the degree of memory is many times more, not just 20% more, but 3 or 4 or 5 times more. And there's hundreds of studies to show this. There's hundreds of studies that show that if you go to a talk and the speaker starts out, I'm going to start with a story, your ears perk up.
Right.
It's going to be interesting. Instead of they start out, well, this thing, my talk has 3 points, and I'm going to make these 3 points. But if you start out with a story, it's a whole different. Your attention is just far more. And one of the things that I've thought a lot about, how do you communicate in today's environment with this polarization of opinions, this information overload that's just enormous, and and this rampant skepticism. So how do you communicate that? Well, one of the things you need to do is to divert people from counter-arguing. And one way to do that is to either put it in a story, or let the story motivate it, or let the story illustrate it. But if there's a story there people, I mean, how you can argue against a story? It's just a story. And that's a really important role of a story.
No, I like that. In the book, you actually mentioned the show Dragnet. And so for those that are a lot younger, they probably never saw it. But, it's because you also talk about the fact that people think communicating facts makes it more clear. But as Detective Sergeant Joe Fratty used to say in Dragnet, just the facts, ma'am. So why is this assumption really flawed?
Well, the same research I was referring to a second ago just finds that, first of all, people don't care about facts, so they don't even listen to you. Some people actively avoid you. I mean, there's avoidance strategies, and so they'll pay for not seeing your ads, and So there's that. But even if they get exposed to it by accident or something, then they either counter argue or they accept it and forget it. And there's no lasting communication that's going on.
Well, if you have a set of facts you need to communicate, how can companies kind of turn those descriptive facts into a relevant narrative? You have a strategy for that?
Well, yeah, I do. One way is to use stories. That is really a powerful way because they divert people from counter arguing, because they can gain attention, and because they can get involvement. And if you get involvement, you are going to remember more, and so on. So, that's one mechanism. There's other. I talk about communicating in today's environment, and stories is one way to go. But you also need to know that to get their attention, you need to be drop-down humorous or wet eyes emotional, or just some fantastic functional information or something. You've got to have something that they will say, yeah, I can deal with it 60 seconds or further 30 seconds out of my life and look at this. So that becomes more important than ever. And of course, that means that it's more important than ever to somehow connect that to your brand. I mean, the history is full of these brands that had very successful advertising for which people didn't remember who was the advertiser. And so there's that. So you need to have your brand is kind of one of the heroes or participants of the story if you can. And a second thing, as I tell people, is that the tagline is really important, because if you do get through, the use of a tagline does a lot of things. Tactically, it just tells people, well, this is the point of the ad. You don't have to figure it out. This is the point of it. But the more important thing it does, it starts to build equity in a brand position, and the way the discussion is framed. George Lakoff is a guy it's at UC Berkeley, a linguist, and he wrote a book. Is there an elephant in the room? Is that the right? It was something like that, and it's been the book that's probably influenced me more than any other. And what he says is, it's not the quality of the argument. It's not who wins the my brand is better than your brand argument. It's what the argument is about that matters. I mean, it matters if you're talking about the pluses and minuses of tax relief or investment in infrastructure. I mean, it just matters. And the argument is, if you can argue about the way you want it framed, I mean, even if you lose the argument, you win the game, you win the battle, because then that elevates that to the prime position so a tagline does that. The third thing I recommend is to look at other ways to communicate. And so I'm thinking about events. You can have one company has a contest to pick the firm that uses their product to most effect to create a sustainable environment. And it's a worldwide 250 submissions. They have a big deal thing in New York. And that just generates a lot of visibility and credibility for them that you couldn't get with advertising saying, look at me, I'm credible and really good at this stuff. Another thing is sponsorships. And, like look at FedEx, what their sponsorship does to them in the way of visibility and so on. And a third is social programs. And they're another vehicle. Look at Dove Real Beauty, what that's done to them. Increased sales from $2.6 billion to $6.5 billion, all on the basis of of a program that has nothing to do with why you should buy Dove soap or Dove shampoo.
Right. Gave a tagline in the book. I remember that early in the book, it was the thing about like a girl. So run like a girl or whatever, like a girl. And that was
Yes.
how that changed people's perceptions.
Yes. Yeah. So anyway, I think that, as I said, given today's hostile communication environment, that's more important than ever. But it's not a matter of checking off a box. You need a home run tagline. And usually you need it to capture more than what's in a specific ad or event or something. It should be a little broader than that. But all these different ads or events or something, they tend to build equity in that tagline, and it can be a force.
So the tagline might be part of the answer to this next question, but in the book you talk about a crucial aspect that is we need to be able to get and keep people's attention. And I remember a few years ago seeing a stat that I think has since been debunked as a myth, but it said that the attention span of a guppy was 8 seconds, and humans have about half that attention span. And so, and in the book though, you do mention some YouTube research. I think it's 15 seconds. So if you can get it past the first 15 seconds, they'll stay, and you continue to write about it. In the first 2 paragraphs, you need to catch their attention. So when there's so many things competing for our eyeballs, and usually those negative stories do tend to draw people in, what are some ways that we can, make sure our narrative sticks with them after the first few seconds?
Well, I think the format is really important. There's this. I remember when I started blogging. I've done 400 blogs now. My staff said, "Well, what you really want is 30-second blogs or 1 minute. A couple of sentences or a couple of paragraphs. That's it." And I said, "Well, I'm not comfortable with that. I need to say something. It's going to take me 600-800 words anyway."
Right.
And if you think about it, the success of longer essays is quite remarkable. I mean, it's not gotten to the point where you have to have everything in 30 seconds or everything in 1 paragraph. You just don't. The columnists at New York Times, they do 600 words or something, and then you look at what's really remarkable about today's communication environment and media environment. What's really remarkable is the success of podcasts like your own. I mean, let me ask you a question. How come you don't have a podcast that's 3 minutes long?
You're preaching to the choir, David, because I'm with you. If I can't say something impactful in 30 seconds.
Exactly. You wouldn't have an audience if it was 30 seconds, if you limit yourself to 3 or 5 minutes. And that's sort of the conventional wisdom. People don't have patience anymore. But if it's in the right format, it's just the opposite. And the big growth industry, the big efficient way to communicate now is podcasts. And I'm sure you know that, and you're enjoying your success because you're in the right stream.
Right. It's funny. We live in a world of, I think the acronym is TLDR, too long, didn't read. I'm like, but the article itself was only 7 minutes. You couldn't read 7 minutes. I mean, so I've had the same conversation with people saying, Clint, you need to be shorter in your what you're posting. And to me, I don't want to do it because I can't say something impactful and really meaningful in 10 seconds. I can maybe hook you.
And the result and the real truth is that this, like most generalizations, it's got a little bit of truth because it applies to some people in some situations, but it doesn't mean it's a universal truth.
Right.
And the strategy world is rife with those. I mentioned the BCC growth share matrix, and that was valid for a certain number of people at a certain point in time, but it got much more extensively used and accepted than it should have, and it eventually died because of that.
Yeah. It's I remember, I think books, So your point is true, because I remember getting the Ayn Rand's Atlas Shrugged, this book, as a gift once, and I must have started that book 5, 6 different times because I just couldn't get into it. The very first few pages were just, it didn't intrigue me. But then eventually I made myself read, and once I got a few pages in, then it picked up, and I was enamored and stayed all the way to the end. But if you don't hook them in the beginning, it's tough.
Yeah, yeah, that's right.
So let's say that I have an organization and I think it's boring and there's no signature stories. What's the best way to go about trying to uncover some? I think you talk in the book about bringing groups together and maybe even building a story bank at some point. So what do you think?
Well, yeah, you need two things. You find good stories, and then you've got to find people that can present them and distribute them to the right audiences. And incidentally, a really important audience is employees. But one thing I do, and I wrote a book about this. It's called it's about purpose driven brands, and the idea is that if you really have nothing to say that people are going to get involved with or get emotional about or anything, nothing to say, it's really good to look to find a signature social program, because that can provide energy, that can provide an image lift, that can provide engagement, and as I mentioned, my one of my examples that I like to use is Dove, because first of all, we have numbers for Dove. We know they increased sales from 2.6 to 6.5 in 17 years, but also they helped literally hundreds of millions of women and girls have a better life, have better self confidence, and so on. So it's such a win-win. But if again you think about it, Dove is got nothing to say that's of interest to anybody as far as their products go.
Right.
They don't have anything to say as far as their organization goes either, except that when they created the Real Beauty program, and incidentally, as they did that in a desperate time, because their moisturizer sort of leading advantage, the patent ran out, and others had moisturizers, and then they went into things like deodorant, and moisturizer isn't exactly a plus for deodorants. And so they needed something new. And then they stumbled on this fact that 2% of the world's women regarded themselves as beautiful. And that just sparked somebody in the organization. And then they started to study that, and they became really a thought leader and so on. And they developed all these great experiments to demonstrate how that is. And in one, they had two doors for beautiful people and not beautiful. And they just asked me, why did you go through this door? And they had another where they had sketch artists that from a woman's description of herself drew her. And then from the description of a stranger who was looking at her, they drew that too. And the stranger's description was much more attractive than the person herself. And so they ran ads about this. And in 2013, Clint, you won't believe this, that was the most viral ad in the history of advertising. That ad went more viral than any other ad in the history of advertising. Again, this is bar soap we're talking about. Anyway, and that it just struck a chord.
Yeah.
I mean, it just struck a chord. And so anyway, my advice is to companies that find it hard to find, customer stories or employee stories or product stories that will really capture people's imagination and And incidentally, it should be over a long time period. We're not talking about a one season promotion or anything. We're talking about 17 years or something. Anyway, I think that one place to look is social programs. Find a
Okay.
signature social program. You don't have to make them. You can adopt a nonprofit. Like Thriven adopted Habitat for Humanity 17 years ago, and it's not that well known, except among their 2 million customers and their families. And every one of those knows about the Habitat mission at Thriven, and how some teams go in Africa and they have their own take on a little bit of their take. They've even got a brand on it called Build It or something. Anyway, that's one of my advices.
Yeah, I think I'm probably going to get the company wrong, and I apologize in advance. I think it was Salesforce. Somebody had a 111 program.
Well, that's Salesforce. Yes.
Okay.
Yeah. That's interesting for a lot of reasons. One of the things is that, I'm sure you have entrepreneurs in your audience that are just starting, and Salesforce had the social program 111 in the first week of their existence. They're sending 3 people in a hotel room and designing this company, and 111 was part of their design. Actually, the founder of Salesforce, he he left Oracle, and where he was a really top executive, but he wanted his own company, and he took a sabbatical, went to India, and he talked to a guru in India for 3 months or so, who told him, "You can have a company that can do social good. It's possible." And so he came back. That was part of his inspiration. He was going to develop a company that was going to do social good out of the box, and so he developed this 111. The other thing about the 111 program is that it not only is still alive, but they opened it up 6 or 7 years ago to other companies with a challenge. Why don't you do that? They got something like 300 companies that are doing that. Can you imagine the impact that that's made?
Yeah.
I mean, talk about leveraging or scaling. I mean, just to do it yourself is pretty meaningful, but to get 300 companies, some of them large, to do that, you've multiplied the ability of American enterprise to help do social good. It's manyfold.
And sometimes the story is actually, even if it's not social good, you tell the story of, I think it's Columbia Pictures and Lowe's Theaters, and how the guy used the story of Lawrence of Arabia to really bring the troops together, because he had 3 disparate businesses that were, I guess, none of them really doing that well. But then through the story, he brought them all together, and they turned the company around.
Yeah, the idea there was that he wanted people to behave like Lawrence of Arabia. And a way to do that was to tell the Lawrence of Arabia story, or bring it to their attention. And I think that the larger point here is that stories are extraordinarily important for internal use, for building a culture within a company. That's almost impossible to do without some stories. Often it's the founder story, but it can be some, brand pillar of the brand culture.
Now, what are some of the common mistakes an organization might make when they're trying to tell their story? Did they get too factual, or too nebulous? What are some of the common mistakes?
Well, I can tell you, for B2B businesses,
Right.
on one hand, they are the ones that are the best at creating stories. Our consulting company, Profit, we have 100 of them, maybe more, 100 stories. And
So you practice what you preach. I love it.
well, not necessarily, because all these stories are dumbed down to one page, and they don't have. There's a few exceptions, but by and large, they've taken out all the tension of how you did this great thing. They've taken out all the people. You don't get to know any of the people that are involved. They take out anything that would be of interest. So it just comes down to a very dry, we did this, and the client thought we are wonderful people, and this was a great job, and it improved the company. And there's nothing. There's no magic of storytelling there at all. And I think that's not only true with our company, I think that's true with many B2B companies. And there's a couple of reasons for that. One is that they're sensitive to clients. They think that clients might be offended or not happy with hearing their sorry state of affairs that once existed, or the clients might figure, I figured this out. I don't want to let my competitors know because they'll figure it out, which is almost always nothing, is not going to happen. But nevertheless, even if the client thinks it might happen, then the brand firm is reluctant to go into detail, and then there's sometimes they're reluctant to tell a customer story because they think the customer, even not in a bead contest, in other contests, like a nonprofit will think, oh, our clients don't want to be exposed because they're a little ashamed, and that's also not true. A lot of them are quite eager to tell our stories. So anyway, that's one reason that B2B people. Another reason is just that they have this format. It's a one-page format, or it's a 3-minute video format, whatever the format is, and they don't develop a format that is suitable to tell that story. And the third problem is that especially B2B companies don't have people that are good at this. I mean, they didn't hire anybody that's good at storytelling. They didn't hire anybody that's good at finding stories. And so therefore, the stories tend to be, shallow. They tend to be uninteresting. And even stories that could have a lot of intrigue, be very intriguing, but they not, well, and then of course, well, anyway, some companies are hiring newspaper people or press people or reporters because they're good at sniffing out stories, and they're good at writing up stories. And so we're seeing that.
There were a couple stories you told that I had never heard of, but the interesting part to me was that they're actually told more often by the clients than they are the companies themselves. There's a story of Nordstrom buying back the worn out tires they didn't sell, and then Zappos with delivery for pizza, finding restaurants that were open. There are two companies going out of their way it kind of speaks to the culture of the companies. So it's a great story to tell internally for new employees about here's who we are as a company, but then the customers eat it up.
Yes. That word seeps out to the customers, but it's quite amazing. When I was given some talks on branding locally, I would ask people to raise their hand how many have heard of that Nordstrom story, and 60% of the audience would raise their hand. Nordstrom's has not mentioned or publicized in any way that story for decades, maybe never. It's not something they ever talk about. 60% of the people knew about it. I mean, isn't that extraordinary?
It is. It is.
And that means that the story is so graphic. I mean, people bringing in a used tire, even if it was a tire shop, you wouldn't replace a used tire with a new tire. I mean, it wore out.
And then trusting the customer what they said they paid and giving them that money back.
Yeah. Anyway, and it turned out it was a Nordstrom store, but there was on that site a tire store way back when. And this guy had bought the tire at that site.
But the employee, I think if I recall the story, was a new employee, but he knew that he would be backed up and doing what he did. So
yeah, that's right. And that was really the point of the story. It wasn't so much the return policy as it was the empowerment to the employees.
Yeah, and there was the other story on Zappos where a customer called in and said they couldn't find a pizza restaurant that was open, and so clearly nothing to do with shoes, but the guy actually went out and Googled, I guess, and found some restaurants that were open 24 hours that sold pizza. And again, it's one of those powerful anecdotes. It just keeps going.
Yeah, and the point there, of course, is that you're not there just to process orders. You're there to deal with the customer's needs.
One of the things I'm curious about is how does fostering a storytelling culture help your employees become more effective communicators and leaders, or does it? Is there a correlation?
Good question. I think that there's a lot of things you can do to make your employees more effective, and I think that knowing about having a sort of a repertoire of stories to tell. When friends said, "What do you do? What does your company do?" If you could answer with a story or two to illustrate, instead of saying that, we go way and above and beyond making pizza and processing pizza orders. So let me tell you a story, and so as a way to communicate who you are to your friends and relatives, I think that would be, I think that would be a good thing to do.
And we touched on humor already, but that's a powerful aspect of stories, and I love humor. I find it can be quite helpful.
As a matter of fact, my daughter Jennifer, I don't want to keep bringing her up, but she wrote a book called Humor Seriously. And the idea of that is that humor in managing a company or being in a team is really important, because if you're have a team situation, and see if this doesn't strike you right, Clint. If you're in a team situation and there's some tension, maybe there's a power struggle, maybe there's a disagreement or something, and somebody interjects humor, everybody lets out a sigh of relief and gets more creative. I mean, they've proved that if you introduce humor into a team situation, it'll be more creative.
Right.
And of course, it does so many things for the author of the humor. It makes them, much less autocratic. Makes them much more of a likable person, and I think that for most people, in most cases, that will help their management effectiveness. Not everybody, and not all cases. There's always the Bobby Knights and the Steve Jobs of the world, but on average, it's probably going to help people to become more effective.
And if you're one of these people who are thinking that, you gave the Dove example, you said because we have data, but what if there's a company who or somebody in the organization who thinks that storytelling is squishy and soft and you really can't measure it? Yet in the book you talk about you can actually use stories to help seal the deal by giving context to facts.
Yes, it's not the case you have to embed your facts in a story. A story can be used to motivate facts. You give the story and say, and then then 40% of whatever. Or you can give the facts first and quickly say, let me illustrate with a story. And then the facts sort of come to life. So there's those three ways that a story can be involved in making, getting across descriptions and facts and feelings and values.
Stories can take many different forms. You're obviously a prolific author, so you do a lot of writing, as do I. But then you give examples in the book about Red Bull, and of course, I had to stop reading, go YouTube it to see what the guy jumping out of 8,000 feet or whatever it was in the air, and then hitting 600. I think he broke the speed barrier coming down. And so, what do you think the role of these technologies are in storytelling, with virtual reality coming, AI, digital, et cetera?
Wow, that's a good question too. I think I would maybe reflect that and ask you the same question. But um, I think that AI is when it comes to branding, helps us develop brand strategies a lot faster, and uh, and it helps us develop and test out prototype typical content and ads faster. And I just don't know about stories. If I'm sure it would have a role, but I'm not used it in that way or not.
Okay. I am curious. You give so many, I love stories, and you give so many different examples in the book of different stories. And do you have like a favorite? Did any of them that really just has been your favorite child in that sense?
Well, I can think of a couple. One I really like is the story about the CEO of a Chinese company that was struggling, and he was elevated to CEO to try to save the company. They made appliances, and 2 or 3 weeks after theirs, a customer came in and said, "I've got a defective appliance." He said, "No problem. We'll go to the warehouse," where he found that 20% of all the appliances there were also defective. He brought them into the factory floor and got a sledgehammer and had his employees destroy them. And he said, from that moment on, we're going to build only quality appliances. That company is now the leading appliance manufacturer in the world, Haier. And that story is in every employee's mind and every retailer's mind today, and probably some consumers as well. But they've enshrined the sledgehammer at the home office, and you don't have to say that. We're really we do great quality work. Well, how believable is that? I mean, or how differentiating is that? However, to say that, remember the sledgehammer story, and then it graphically comes into place, and you get an instinct that there's probably nobody better than higher quality because of that story.
I can envision every new hire getting a little miniature sledgehammer paperweight for their
Yeah.
desk. A reminder.
And then there's a lot of stories around these signature social programs. One is Barclays. Barclays was the least trusted brand and the least trusted industry in 2010 because they were blamed for that financial collapse through the LIBOR stuff. And nothing they could do could change that. They said, we're not really, we weren't all the only one responsible. And anyway, we've changed, and you can believe in us now. And then they developed a social program called Digital Eagles, which is 17 employees help customers, elderly especially, to deal with the digital world. And then they created a video of a couple of their clients. One of which was a guy named Rich that was a soccer player, but he hurt his knee, could no longer play soccer, but he could play walking soccer. 6 on a side, he only walk. And he wanted a website that would promote the sport. And so he got Digital Eagles to help them. They showed a video about that. You got to know Steve Rich, you got to know his wife, you got to know his grandson, you got to know his mates. And it was just such an emotional uplift to see how walking soccer had changed his life. And they put out that video, and trust went up 35%, consideration went up 130% or something. And they broke through the trust thing. And these increases were much more than competitors. Anyway, so that's an example of how a story can really touch people and do what other communications couldn't.
If there's one story that every leader should be able to tell, what is it?
I think there is no one story. I mean, it can come from customers, it can from a founder, it can from a program, why we developed this program, or how we got this new product out, and what are the barriers we overcame, or so it could be, and it could be about a social program that's connected to our brand. So there's no one story. I don't think it's so idiosyncratic to the situation.
Yeah, because there's multiple audiences to receive that story. So as we wrap up, I'm going to ask you 3 questions that I ask all my guests. First one is, are there any leadership principles that speak to you personally and guide your day-to-day behaviors?
Really good question. Well, I'm a sort of a student of leadership and CEO, an amateur student, I should say. And I've always been wondering how these guys like Steve Jobs and Bobby Knight and the more recent examples can be effective. And one of the things they do is they really understand the business. I mean, Bobby Knight really knew what a basketball player was supposed to do. I mean, he was really good at it at a detail level.
Mm-hmm.
And so he could go on the floor and show how to set a screen. And he wasn't managing from a high level, delegating. And the other thing he did was he made his employers better. And so did Steve Jobs. And to this day, you look at people worked under either of those, and they will say, boy, I'm so glad I did, because I became a better professional than I ever thought I could become. He raised people to a new level. These are the people that survived being under him. I mean, there's a whole bunch of people that left that didn't. But third, they were success. They were so successful, and success sort of masks a lot of different problems. It's a lot easier to be okay when you're successful. And for every Steve Jobs and Bobby Knight, we have 50 that weren't successful under that strategy and did a lot of bad things. But what it shows that it's hard to generalize.
Yeah.
That only one quality is always good. Having said that, I think somebody that's supportive and humorous and so on is got a bigger chance of winning.
What's the best piece of advice you've ever been given?
Well, I think this guy, George Lakoff, that wrote the book, that said it's more important to decide what the conversation is about than winning the conversation argument. I think that's meant the most to me, I think.
Okay. And what is the best book or article you've read recently, and what was the key takeaway?
Well, it would be that one, George
Same
Lakoff's book. But the art of, let's see. There's a lot of others, but I like to read books about CEOs, the strategy they did, and there's been some great ones out by the CEO of IBM, of Pepsi-Cola, of Unilever, and those I find really instructive.
And you said there was kind of one of your favorite books was there's a professor who wrote, was it The Elephant in the Room or something like that?
Yeah, that's George Lakoff.
Okay. All right. I'm definitely going to pick that one up. So, David, this has been great. If people want to learn more about you or engage with Profit, how can they do that?
I have a blog on LinkedIn, and so that's one way to keep up with me. And Aaker on Branding, the second edition, is a good way to get an overview of all my branding books.
All right. Well, David, I really appreciate your time today. Thank you so much for the conversation.
Okay, my pleasure, Clint.